we are. Good morning once again. Here's our second YouTube video on the discussion on
episode. It's an episode.
On an episode.
It's like a series.
Yes, it's going to be a series. Okay. You're very precious about that, but you're not precious about an intro. We said we would discuss one or two topics last week. We said we would discuss the teacher strikes or the Iran deal. And we both decided to discuss the Iran deal because it's also tied to what's happening this past week with the Palestinian protests as well that are happening in Gaza, and Israel and its involvement with influencing the killing of the Iran deal, really. So why don't we start from there?
Okay, I have a question for you first.
Yeah.
So you had done a pretty good job convincing me that we should talk about the teacher strike because of the strike wave, and that's a big deal. But over the week, you had said we should do the Iran deal. What's the single biggest reason you changed your mind?
Whereas this is fresh, and I'm a little upset of everything that's happening over the week with the killing of Palestinians, with the killing of the Iran deal and more sanctions and possible punishment on European companies and businesses that are doing business with Iran. I mean, Trump pulled out. It just doesn't make any sense. To me, it seems almost as if he is trying to undermine everything the Obama administration did. That's what it seems like to me. Right? It's only speculation. It's only my opinion. And it's not the complete truth. I'm only saying it just seems like it, everything is being pulled out. Everything is undermining some previous administration just to get back at someone else. It just seems like that to me, to some extent. It's not the full position I'm taking.
Okay.
All right. So Iran deal. What is the Iran deal? For those for folks that may not be familiar with some just minor details, the Iran deal is what we commonly know when we hear it in the news. The Iran deal is the Joint Comprehension Plan of Action. It was a deal that was created in agreement with, when I was in Europe, it was created in July 2015. And it was an agreement between 6 countries, or as Europe, they would commonly know it as the E3+3 group, which was the 5 states of the United Nations Security Council. The United Nations Security Council is one of the 5 organs of the United Nations, and they are the permanent states of the Council, the Security Council, which are Russia, China, France, UK, the US. I think it's P5+1 is because Germany was also part of the intermediary, I hope I'm saying it correctly, part of the negotiation process as well. I'm not going to use intermediary because I'm always, last video as well, I didn't know how to. Okay, part of the negotiation process with Iran in 2015. It was considered one of the biggest successes of the Obama administration in the USA for having created a deal with Iran. I think largely Benjamin Netanyahu, who is the Prime Minister of Israel, is the biggest factor in influencing Donald Trump because he finds Iran to be a threat since it's so close to Israel. And I believe that Israel wants to create a balance of power in the Middle East, feeling a bit isolated in the Middle East. And that is why Israel is really creating this influence, even though Israel, I should point out, is violating all kinds of international law about their nuclear arms. And so this is what Israel's influence is, with the bizarre PowerPoint that Benjamin Netanyahu had trying to influence, I think, a party of one, which was really Donald Trump, because he just likes everything to be simplified for him. So he did this weird PowerPoint explaining why Iran deal is not working and why we should try to kill this Iran deal. I do want to point out that there is one thing that is misguided in the recent news. When the White House released a statement to the press, it did say that Iran has nuclear weapons, and that was false, because Iran had nuclear weapons, and they disarmed themselves in order not to be sanctioned off by the international community. And later on, the White House retracted their statement and corrected it from has to had. And I know it seems kind of minor, but it is very important that they acknowledge how Iran is. I mean, it's a matter of like war or peace or agreements being held, and it's really it also shows the incompetency of the White House for having released such a statement insinuating that Iran has nuclear arms when they have numerous times proven to the international community that they don't have enough to be a threat. And this is tied now then, and we're going to get to this. I think we should just focus on this Iran deal. I want you to respond to this, to also how Israel is a hypocrite in this, having just want to point fingers at Iran when they themselves have weapons of mass destruction as well, and violating all kinds of international law. And I want to get into the Israel and Palestine situation afterwards, so I will make those connections afterwards. Your response.
First off, I think one of the implications of Trump breaking the deal, and clearly it's led to more. It's led to aggression on the part of Israel. It's led to response on the part of Iran, and it has led to things that make people nervous, and like we're going more towards war. And I agree with that. That is true. Yeah. This is a war-making adventure on the part of the U.S. But the presumption is that there wasn't a war-making adventure before that, and there was. Barack Obama's the UN Security Council +5 P5 +1 was a war-making adventure against Iran. They put sanctions on Iran. They tried to dictate to Iran whether they could or could not have nuclear weapons. And let's be clear, what are the countries that have the two most nuclear weapons?
The USA
and Russia. 8,000 on one side, 7,000 on the other side, okay? Then from there, it's like 200 with Israel or something like that, okay? Mm-hmm. What country has ever used nuclear weapons?
What country out of those two?
Of any of them?
The USA.
The only one.
Yeah.
What country is even currently irradiating the Middle East?
The USA.
The USA. Mm-hmm. The most dangerous country is the United States. And the most dangerous countries on the globe are the ones that are permanent members of the UN Security Council. So why are they going after Iran? They're going after Iran because there's, quote, a war on terror. And the war on terror had an axis of evil. And let's talk about who that axis is. It's Iraq. It was, I don't know if Afghanistan was, I don't think it was. It was Iraq, Iran, Syria, Libya. What do all those countries, North Korea, all those countries have in common is they're either being attacked or under the threat of attack by the United States. But the fact is that the real axis of evil is centered in Washington, D.C., and probably is better described as the permanent UN Security Council members. That's the axis of evil. And for them to tell anyone that they can have or not have nuclear weapons is not just hypocrisy. It's hypocrisy for us to think that our government has the right to do that. That's our hypocrisy. They're doing that because they plan on controlling the globe picking these different targets. Mm-hmm. So the only difference is, even when Barack Obama first did that agreement, everyone knew that was not going to hold forever, that at some point they were going to go after Iran, because Iran is an ally of Russia. So the question is not if they were going to go after Iran, it was when. And Trump has merely sped up that time frame. Mm-hmm. I do not believe this was pushed by Israel. I believe it was pushed by the Trump administration, who is part of a conservative wing of the U.S. ruling class.
You don't think that Israel influenced or is in agreement
well, they are in agreement.
Pulling out the Iran?
Oh, of course they're in agreement. They were long critics of it. But the push for this is coming from the U.S., not from Israel.
All right.
The U.S. is the one who basically earlier had agreed, oh yeah, we're going to give you, we're going to put the U.S. embassy in Jerusalem, and that can be we'll acknowledge that as your capital. They were lining this thing up for a while. They'd already said in 2016 that they were going to pull out of the deal. Mm-hmm. And what has happened now is the U.S. has decided it's going to be more aggressive now, more directly aggressive with Iran, but it's not going to be doing the fighting. Israel's going to do the fighting. Mm-hmm. So they now they can pull their troops potentially out of Syria, but use Israel's direct confrontation with Iran to put Iran in a box. Because Iran, since the disaster, since the Iraq war has been a disaster for the United States, it has strengthened the hand of Iran. It has strengthened the hand of Russia in the region. And at least for these gangsters who think that they can decide what happens in the Middle East. And so they're trying to figure out how they can get that back while still pivoting back towards Asia. So I just think a lot of the things that are difficult for me is people act like there was a peace agreement before, and there wasn't.
The Iran deal is not a peace agreement.
No, it's a war agreement. It's making war on Iran. Mm-hmm. So if you were upset about this, you should be upset about that. Mm-hmm. The U.S. has no right to dictate to anyone about having nuclear weapons because they're the user of it. They're the biggest abusers of violence in the globe, and that's the thing that disturbs me, is the fact that, again, people.
There is any deal at all.
No, the fact that people are getting upset about Trump's when they should have been upset about Barack Obama's, because he's doing the same thing, and everyone knew that this was just setting in time. And if you agree with the framework of war on terror, that the U.S. has the right to decide what countries can defend themselves, because that's really why they're upset about this. The reason they don't want Iran to have nuclear weapons is because it makes it that much harder for them to attack them later. Mm-hmm. That's the same reason they can't allow it from North Korea. So the best way to defend yourself if you're on the hit list of the acts of evil is to get nuclear weapons. Yeah. And everyone knew that when the U.S. went after Iraq, it was going to encourage all these other countries to develop a nuclear weapon. So to stop them is to say, you don't have the right to defend yourself. We are going to be attacking you either now or later. And that's what's happening.
What do you make of the having some agreement amongst nations to have, because I think that it is idealistic to think that there is going to be a disarmament of nuclear weapons
right.
at all.
Why would you? Well, go ahead.
And I think no one is going to just disarm themselves. And so what do you think? What do you make of agreements within nations to be able to have some peace process, so-called peace process, because it is a war, it's a war deal, really, to be able to have an agreement where they don't kill each other?
Well, sanctions are acts of war. They're economic war, generally, but they are generally predecessors towards military war. And I would say the U.S. has no right to impose sanctions on any country on the globe. It has no right to impose, and that I'm not going to support my country, this country, imposing sanctions, whatever, when it itself is the biggest purveyor of that violence. So if you wanted to start a peace process, a legitimate one in the United States, then the U.S. would bring its around nuclear weapons, non-proliferation agreement. Then I think the first thing the U.S. should do is bring its 7,000 nuclear warheads down to zero. Start there, and then you can start to say, we did this, and now we're going to try to get the rest of you to do it.
In the current negotiations that there are with North Korea, there are negotiations in place. Well, who knows now? Yeah. But there's an ongoing negotiation process with North Korea. I think that given what has happened with Iran, I think that North Korea is looking at that as what's going to happen with them.
I've heard that, but I don't think that's true. I think these people are gangsters at the top with regards to
these people.
The people who run the U.S., China, Russia, and them. Okay, the rulers of the United States and the rulers who oversee the permanent members of the UN Security Council. Okay. They're all gangsters. They're the most powerful gangsters. All right. Then there's sub-level gangsters, people like Kim Jong-un or Barash Assad, or who's Khomeini. I'm not sure if it's Ahmadinejad who's running Iran right now. But they all know they're liars. Mm-hmm. They know that these agreements are not agreements, or even, and there's a difference between treaties and agreements. They all know that the minute it asserts the purposes of each other, they're going to go against those things. So no country operates with the idea of trusting other leaders outside their country. They don't trust each other inside their country. So no, I think that's for the public consumption about trust and things like this. Everyone knows that if Trump is going to reach a deal with North Korea, they're going to give them something that they're going to do it on the basis of naked self-interest to the North Koreans, to cut them a deal. Now we're getting far afield, but cut them a deal that will bring them into the riches of South Korea, and then make the Kim Jong-un family madly wealthy, and then somehow make it so that China does not feel threatened by that. Mm-hmm. And in the case of what's happened with Israel, basically they've gotten Saudi Arabia to recognize Israel's right to exist. All right, and Saudi Arabia is agreeing with what Israel is doing with Iran, because that's the biggest opponent in the region is Saudi Arabia, with Iran next to Israel. And U.S. has decided, well, we're going to let you go and attack the Yemenis. You know, that the U.S. is going to be using Saudi Arabia and Israel more directly as proxies for fighting fighting wars mm-hmm. in the Middle East, to allow the U.S. to move its troops out of the region. Reserve them for other things, and while still having a method and a strategy for pushing back against Iran, who is the proxy for Russia. So the U.S. obviously still has interests in the Middle East, and those have been shown with the Iraq War and the war in Afghanistan, attacks on Libya, attacks in, whatever they're doing in Syria. But now that strategy is shifting towards using Israel and Saudi Arabia as more direct military proxies for their war making in the region. That's my feeling.
Yeah. What would you say is the relationship between Iran and Israel?
It's competitive. Like both of them are regional powers who hope to, be able to push their agendas in that region for who will. Yeah, I guess I would say that.
Yeah. I think that their relationship has shifted over time, and I think that Israel finds themselves sometimes isolated. Now they're in alliance with the Saudis, mm-hmm. but I do feel like they find themselves isolated in the Middle East. And to have Iran have such strong power dynamic in the Middle East is a threat to them. And I do think, this is me, that I do think that yes, I agree that this country has already decided to have to pull out of this deal. But I do think that Israel has a major influence, because they've been pushing for this, because ultimately Iran is a threat to Israel. That's how I feel about it. I feel that Israel is just on this beating the wars of drum to be able to have to be another world power that is strong in the Middle East.
You're saying Israel wants to be that, or Iran wants to be that?
Israel wants to be that. Okay. Yeah.
Well, I think everyone in their region, every ruler in their region, wants to have the power in their own country, and also is competing with other local rulers to control to get access to resources, or to be able to push the best deals for their companies and things like that. But that's true in every region. That's true in Brazil. That's true in Nigeria. It's true in but I don't think we can mistake a regional power for a global power. And I believe the reason that things have gone down the way they have in the Middle East is because of the interference of the West, starting with the British Empire way back, close to World War I, when this whole region was divided up, and then now continuing with the United States and countries like Russia and China who get themselves involved. But all these countries put their fingers in the pie for their own self-interests, and they create these divisions. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways U.S. does that is by arming and backing Israel and allowing it to keep essentially an apartheid country afloat. The same type of thing that was brought down in South Africa, U.S. supports in Israel, allowing the country which is run for pretty much the interests only of Jewish people at the expense of people who are Muslims. And that's wrong. It's racist, and the U.S. openly supports it. And they also nakedly support a regime in Saudi Arabia, which is not just sexist and homophobic, but is willing to do all sorts of terroristic acts and support all sorts of so-called acts of terror that the U.S. says they oppose. Turns out that the U.S. is the biggest terrorist and is the biggest supporter of terrorism, it appears, whether it comes from Saudi Arabia against the people of Yemen or whether it comes from the Israelis against the people of Palestine.
How would you see is the connection between with the deal and with the Palestinian revolt that's happening currently?
Well, I think what Israel did was cordoned off Gaza, basically after this deal went, and then after this deal went, Israel attacked Iranian bases with either fighters or missiles in Syria, and then Iran shot back. The way it's been reported in the United States was only Iran shot back. They never reported that actually Israel started it. Then when that happened in the Golan Heights and such, U.S. Israel shut down Gaza, in defense, and then that basically put people in a situation where they were going to resist and fight back because they're essentially in an open air prison, and it's like the Warsaw Ghetto. So people were fighting back against it with less weapons than people had in Poland at the time. So, and anybody who resists that is called a terrorist, whether you be Hamas or the Hezbollah in Lebanon. Again, those are other groups resisting, resisting Israel, resisting the influence of the United States, and because of that, they're called terrorists.
A lot of people are going to disapprove with what we just said. I agree that Gaza is like a prison, that you have people encamped almost into a small section. But when we say that, and we're talking about Israelis, Jews here, a lot of people can take that as anti-Semitic. So, I don't know if you want to say anything about that first before we continue, because people can distort things.
Yeah. There's a lot of Jewish people who don't support the right of Israel to exist as a apartheid state, and who would say, like any other country, you can have everyone, no matter what your religious belief is, no matter what your background is, you would have equal rights, and that's what the Palestinian right of return is really about. It's the right to return to the land that they were pushed off of, and their right to have their right to the ownership and continued ownership of that and use of that property, and the rights to live in that society. People call that the destruction of Israel. I would say no country should be allowed to exist in an apartheid way and should be dismantled. I don't trust the United States to do it, but I would support that process happening. And the fact is the United States has its own problem with regards to pushing people off of land and having to make reparations for that. So we really don't have much room to talk when you think about our history and what happened with the Native Americans. So we have all that debt to pay still. And people don't like talking about it, and also around slavery, but that debt is there to be paid still.
And I think my upset stems from, I want to add to it, is that Israel is like putting this propaganda that the Palestinian people are very violent people and that they are just creating revolts and not creating any solutions for peace. With the recent, with Jared and Ivanka Trump and Jared Kushner visiting for the embassy to be moved over to Jerusalem, I think this is not the way to go for the peace process that they're there, if they're to have any. I don't know the solution for the Palestinian-Israel conflict. Maybe you can say something about that. But for me, I don't think that moving the embassy or moving several institutions into an area that is clearly divided as far as who is going to rule it, whether it be the Palestinians or the Israelis, isn't the solution, and it's just creating more tension. And this comes in the midst of having a previous revolt around the border between Palestine and Israel prior to the embassy, prior to this Iran deal. And I think that when you have people coming in and to dictate to the Palestinian people about who is really who has the right of Jerusalem, it gives people this division within the Palestinian people, making them feel as if they have no voice, no clue, and it's just the border is just Israel's just taking over the entire region to the point where you're destroying, and it's not an occupation anymore, it is a colonization. Well, occupation isn't a colonization.
Right.
It is a colonization of the people. And I would even, as far as to say, it's a complete genocide. It's slowly committing a genocide, because that's what their ultimate goal is to do. With the massacres that is happening now, Benjamin Netanyahu says sometimes that the Israeli people have no choice, that the Israeli soldiers have to just shoot below the knee or something, or they look for ways. I just heard in the recent the news how they're even targeting a lot of the people that are disabled, or people or children. And we're talking about, people fighting for their own rights and their own land as well within this region. And this comes in the light of Trump moving this embassy. So I don't know if you wanted to say something about that.
Well, I agree with your criticism of Israel and the disgust with what's going on in Palestine. But honestly, here's my question first. Which party in the United States doesn't support Israel? Do the Republicans not support Israel? Do the Democrats not support Israel? Which party doesn't?
Both support
They
Israel.
both support Israel.
Yeah.
They have for a long time. Right? So the U.S. is in agreement on supporting Israel, and essentially militarily supporting it, financially supporting Israel on their right to engage in this violence. That's my problem. My problem is what my country's doing.
Yeah.
Okay. So the first thing I would say is U.S. out of the Middle East completely. The U.S. no longer gives military aid to Egypt, to Israel, to Saudi Arabia. You can't. You're not allowed to. That's what I would say. That's what I would want my country to do if it was actually committed to a peace process. And secondly, I would say end all sanctions on any country anywhere. All sanctions.
Off.
End. The U.S. has no right to sanction any country because it is the biggest purveyor of violence in the globe. You can't have the biggest violent person sanctioning everyone else, because they're not doing it to make peace. They're doing it to prepare for more war. So my feeling is, and again, when we talk about what's left, the problem with the left in this country is it looks around and tries to do foreign policy for other countries. And our problem is our country. And our country is the one that's creating a major problem in there. I don't know I don't believe the solution is apartheid, but that is for the people in that region to figure out. One of the biggest problems for them figuring it out is the violence and the influence that the U.S. pushes in the Middle East. And that's why our job, if you believe in peace or if you believe in change, our job is to actually get our governments to pull out of those regions, pull their troops out of the regions,
To not meddle with them.
not meddle
to be
with
able
them.
to allow them to have.
You can trade, but frankly, under capitalism, people aren't going to trade without this military control. That's why this goes beyond just capitalism and why we have to end the system as well. But if you're going to talk about peace, if you're going to talk about trying to make peace, then you're going to stop Republicans and Democrats from making sanctions on any country and stop them from pushing, selling weapons or selling munitions or giving economic aid to any country, because they always do it only for the interests of this, what I would call the biggest terrorist on the globe, the United States.
I want to add a criticism for those that are Bernie Sanders fans, because Bernie Sanders tweeted or sent out his own statement about the conflict that is happening currently over the week. He said something along the lines of that Israel is committing atrocities and that Hamas is also promoting it. I felt, just because I feel like some people are these people who are like worshippers of Bernie Sanders, and he's a great guy in many aspects, and I mean, not personally. I'm talking about like some of the policies or some of the things he is wanting to push for here in the USA. My criticism around it is that you cannot go on and say something like both sides are the issue here, because that's the same thing as saying, well, both people are, like when Trump said something about what happened with the clash between the alt-right that happened in Charlottesville, and saying that both sides were at fault. That's how I felt when I read that statement from Bernie Sanders. I felt as if he was trying to say, well, both sides are at fault. Both sides should try to not create this tension or this violence between, because that's not the solution. I'm not a Hamas supporter. I'm not saying that I'm here to defend him. All I'm saying is, it is disgusting to think that the Palestinian people should just sit back and wait to continuously be not just occupied, but to be killed, to be imprisoned, to be targeted, to be continuously harassed, and for the Palestinian just to sit back and wait for peace resolutions. I think part of the peace resolution, and it may not seem so peaceful, is to fight back. It's for the Palestinian people to revolt. It's for them to stand up for themselves. And to criticize the Palestinian people for doing so, what other choice do they have left if the Israelis are coming at them with violence, if they're coming at them with tear gas, and even a small infant that died over the week, that I remember listening to the BBC about how the tear gas that was released and the children that are surrounding, that are nearby, I feel as if Israel is always being placed in this light as if they have no choice, or they are the ones who are just trying to defend themselves. No, the Palestinians are defending themselves. So I want to just point that out, because I was disgusted by that statement that Bernie Sanders had said, that Hamas is inciting also violence. It's not Hamas, it's the Palestinian people who are choosing to take a stand for themselves in order to claim something that they would like as well, which is land, freedom, everything that we all aspire to have in this country, in every country, and a right for sovereignty as well. I think that is fair enough. And part of that peace process, to some it may not look like a peace process, is to revolt, is to have a say in the matter by opposing Israel in this case. And it just 70 years of conflict has it been? And of this, that's what it looks like to stand up for yourself.
I believe we all know that like we see it in movies all the time, an occupied force, whether it's science fiction, comes into a country and people fight back. And most of the time, the people who fight back, in those movies, we consider them heroes. We consider them the people who are like desperately trying to push back against tyranny. And I think that's the case not just with Israel in Gaza or in West Bank. That's the case with the U.S. in Afghanistan. That's the case with U.S. occupation of Iraq. That's the case of Hezbollah resistance to Israel or resistance to even the United States. All those forces are forces of resistance to oppression. Do I agree with everything those people believe in politically? Probably not. I'm not even sure I agree with anything. But if this country were occupied, I guarantee you there would not just be left-wingers, but there'd be right-wingers fighting the occupation, and we'd be on the same side, right? We wouldn't agree with each other around some politics, but we would know that we were right in fighting an occupying force, and that is part of liberating yourself. And it also turns out that those resistance movements are part of keeping the U.S. at bay. The U.S. got bogged down for a while. Part of the reason the U.S. is tilting now towards Iran and using Israel is because they've cleaned up ISIS. And there's lots of questions about where ISIS comes from. Like the U.S. supported it. Seems like other people are saying other forces supported it. But I do think there is a part of ISIS that's what's it called? That's homegrown, and it's a response to occupation of all these powers coming in. Again, don't agree with his politics, but I do believe people in the region have the right to fight back and resist, and I support that.
Yes.
And so that's what I'll say.
Yeah. I think we've covered the Iran deal.
I think so. Okay. We have talked about a lot of things.
Yeah.
We've gone over a whole, and in many ways, I feel like we've just touched on a bunch of areas that themselves we could go into more.
Yeah.
Right.
How are we going to end this video?
We have to decide what we're going to talk about next week.
Okay.
Okay.
So what would you like to discuss? So we're going to be discussing a new topic completely. But every week changes as well. So what I asked Andy over the week was, because we had decided to do the teacher strikes, I had said to you that really Iran is so like the current topic, and I think that we need to add to the discussion, and that's the reason why I changed. So if we do suggest something, if something happens during the week, because every week is something new is happening around the world, and we might see that there's more urgency to discuss that topic, then I think we're going to be flexible about changing it. But a potential topic that we can discuss would be, what would
Do you want me to come up with one first?
Yeah, I think last time I had.
Yeah, you did. Okay. So I think the stuff that's happened in Santa Fe with the 10 students being shot, I think the issues of violence in the United States, gun control, I actually think I am leaning right now towards just kind of going towards issue of the week, and that's what's on my mind right now.
Okay. Yeah. And I will just suggest one, and it does not have to be. I think with the recent, with about torture, Gina Haspel has been approved by the majority here in the USA, and when we discuss torture, I think the FBI has been rallied around her, even putting her as being the first woman of the head of the FBI. I said FBI. CIA. It's the CIA.
It's the CIA, yeah.
Excuse me. CIA. You see, I do know something.
He knows.
Okay. I'm trying to be focused right now on the elections that's happening in my country, in Mexico right now. There's a lot going on right there. So, trying to keep up with two countries and the Middle East and Europe still, and Asia is, I have to say that's my area of I don't know a lot about Asia, but that's my honesty. You should cut that out.
No, it's staying.
No, really, I think when we talk about the torture programs that have happened, I think the CIA points fingers about torture programs that have happened elsewhere, like Japan, but they don't want to acknowledge their torture programs. We're talking about the discussion about pointing fingers elsewhere, but not looking internally. So that is an important discussion. She just got approved by the majority, and even some Democrats for some liberals out there. I think we need to, that's a discussion that we could have. But it's not urgent, it is not like super, we can discuss, because this happened viernes, el shooting.
Yeah.
Friday.
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
okay.
If you're going to find out which one we'll discuss, you'll have to come back next week.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Take care. Bye.